Time of the death of King Edward III on June 21st, 1377, the Wars of the Roses spanned over 3 decades, from 1455 to 1485. Following the death of King Edward III, Edward's 10-year-old son Richard II succeeded to the throne ahead of Edward's 3 surviving sons. The skipping left lingering claims to the throne, especially for the 2 great Plantagenet houses of Lancaster and York. In 1399, Richard II was deposed by Henry V, a win for the Lancasters. The reign remained secured until 1422, when Henry died, leaving his infant son Henry VI as king. King Henry VI was the weakest king the country was to have ever known. In May 1450, tragedy struck. The Duke of Suffolk, the king's right-hand man, was executed by rebels. No one was holding the country together. Henry VI was known as the Mad King, and the country was ascending into anarchy. Henry's wife, Margaret of Anjou, managed to subdue the rebels. She saw it as her duty to protect the country, only she wasn't the only one. Richard of York, the king's cousin, heir to the throne until further notice, had plans of saving the country from further anarchy. York saw self-importance and himself as the right man for the job. Marching into London with 5,000 men beneath his command, he demanded the king to dismiss all his old parliamentary advisers and to appoint him as Lord Protector in charge of the country. 16 days earlier, the king had appointed his other cousin, the Lord of Somerset, the job as Lord Protector. Insulting the king's decision, York called Somerset out as a traitor and coward. However, this sent him on a collision course with Margaret, as Somerset was her closest advisor and ally. Being a woman, Margaret was only able to influence the throne through nobles whose positions she was able to exploit. By attacking Somerset, York was attacking the Queen. Gathering troops at Dartford, York demanded Somerset to be put on trial. The Duke of York had come to London expecting to be made Lord Protector of England, accused the Queen's man Somerset of treason, and walked straight into a trap. He was pushed down to second in line of the throne, not soon after. After 8 years of marriage, Margaret was pregnant with a boy. At the same time, trouble rose in France and English territories were lost to the French. The collapse of the 300-year-old empire sent Henry into a catatonic stupor. Taking quick action, Margaret planned to rule in the name of her baby boy, the Prince Edward of Westminster. Yet again, York denounced Somerset as a traitor. He had muted the Queen. In March 1454, Richard was made Protector of the realm. On Christmas Day, 1454, Henry woke from his stupor. Somerset was immediately released from the Tower of London, and York was stripped of all his powers and land. On May 22, 1455, the 2 opposing sides met at St. Albans. The battle resulted in the death of the Duke of Somerset. Unfavorable by Parliament, the Act of Attainder of 1459 was passed against Richard and all those loyal to him. This act, which stripped all status and lands, expelling them from nobility forever. Warwick, a close ally of Richard's, attacked the royals in Kingsman a year afterwards and awaited the arrival of York. With all premises clear, York took over the crown. For the 3rd time, he was made Lord Protector, making his children the sole heirs to the throne of England. York was killed in battle with Margaret's men on the lands of Sandal Castle on December 30th, 1460. Barely clinging on to power, Britain's King Henry was suffering from a political crisis. Richard, Duke of York's 18-year-old son, Edward, gambled he could snatch the crown from the weak king's hands. Over 60,000 men died in the battle between Edward and Henry at Taunton. Standing beside Edward was Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the man who had made his father Lord Protector, the same man that would make him king. Edward became King of England at only 18 years old. He made a new policy, to turn his enemies into allies to fix fractured England. Warwick became known as the Kingmaker, Edward's right-hand man. Providing financial stability for England, all Edward had to do now was produce an heir. A well-chosen marriage could form alliances between countries, boost trade, and increase military strength. On March 1464, Warwick met with envoys of King Louis of France to arrange a marriage with French Princess Bonne of Savoy. The French joked, "England has 2 rulers, Warwick and one other whose name I have forgotten." On September 1464, Warwick arrived to Reading Abbey to announce the king's engagement with Bonne of Savoy, only to be greeted with Edward's new wife, Elizabeth Woodville, whom he had married 5 months prior. Instead of marrying a valuable foreign princess, he married a divorced subject with children. On May 1465, Elizabeth was crowned Queen of England. All nobles in the land, all but one, Warwick, attended, as a direct snub to the royals. In the eyes of Warwick and all other nobles, Elizabeth's family was the traitor. Her father, Sir Richard Woodville, had fought against Edward at the Battle of Taunton. They were seen as low-ranking opportunists. The marriage, however, had fit perfectly into Edward's plan of restoring his enemies into allies. Edward even ordered Henry VI to be brought to the Tower, not to be executed, but pampered. The French soon realized how irrelevant Warwick was. As an act of open rebellion, Warwick decided to marry off his daughter Isabel to the king's younger brother, the Duke of Clarence, against royal orders. In 1469, rebellion broke out in northern England, sparked by rumors that the Woodvilles were lavishly and selfishly skimming tax money to their own advantage. The riots were rumored to have been headed by a shadowy figure, Robin of Redesdale. Only one man was able to stop Robin of Redesdale, the Earl of Warwick. Demanding an explanation from Warwick and the Duke of Clarence for the secret marriage, the king called a meeting in Nottingham. The meeting was met with a letter from Clarence and Warwick. In it, they quoted, "Certain seditious persons have been practicing a deceivable covetous rule abide the king." These persons were listed as direct Woodvilles, and others of their mischievous rule, opinion, and assent. In other words, any of the other Woodville clan they had forgotten. Edward designed a killing spree to wipe out as many Woodvilles as possible. As England was descending into anarchy, Warwick professed his loyalty to the king, stating, "Sire, all that was done for the good of the realm." Edward forgave Warwick and Clarence, sticking to his policy. On March 1470, rebellion broke out in Lincolnshire, and Edward sent out troops at the village of Empingham and Peterborough. Soldiers found inside of Sir Robert Well's helmet, the leader of the rebellion, a letter containing information indicating that Warwick's and Clarence's influence on the rebellion. Fleeing to France, Warwick turned to Margaret of Anjou, the only person that hated Edward more than him. The plan? Kick Edward off the throne and replace him with Henry. In October 1470, Henry became king once again. On March 1471, Edward returned to London, only asking for his dukedom to be restored. Henry was then locked in the Tower. Returning to the Thames, Edward was reunited with his wife, who had given birth to a healthy baby boy. Edward now had a throne, wife, and heir. On April 14, 1471, Edward and Warwick went to battle for the last time. The same day, Warwick was killed by Edward's troops. His body was stripped naked, all but a loincloth, and brought back to London. There would be no more forgiveness. On April 14th, on the 21st of May, 1471, Henry VI died of suspected murder. In the late summer of 1483, the two apparent heirs to the throne, 12-year-old King Edward V and 9-year-old Prince Richard, were murdered in the Tower. The man responsible is almost certainly their uncle Richard III. On April 9th, 1483, Edward IV died. Richard, the king's younger brother, was a hero who had successfully tamed the north and crushed the rebellious Scots. After his brother's death, he was made protector of the realm, in control of the country until 12-year-old Edward V reached adulthood. In the following days of the king's death, the king's council was in charge of the country. Demanding immediate rule, Richard was granted his title as protector of the realm and regent. Delaying the coronation of Edward, Richard convinced the council to send the young king to the Tower. The young king would never step out of the Tower again. Richard, Edward's younger brother, joined him, and on June 9th, all servants were dismissed. October 1483 marked Richard III's coronation. He was the last Plantagenet king, and the 14th. Spanning 3 decades, Margaret Beaufort waited patiently in the sidelines for her turn. Half-sister-in-law of King Henry VI, Margaret was widowed with a baby at age 13. On January 1458, Margaret married Henry Stafford and swore loyalty to the new king, Edward IV, who her husband would die fighting for. In June of 1472, she married her third and last husband, Lord Thomas Stanley. With the hated Richard III on throne, she had a stance for her son, Henry Tudor, who gained popularity. Alongside Elizabeth Woodville, new widow, she planned to overthrow Richard and replace him with Henry Tudor, who would then later marry Elizabeth of York, Elizabeth's daughter. On August 22, 1485, Henry and Richard met at Bosworth Field. Richard was killed, and at age 28, Henry became King of England, crowned by Stanley himself. The Tudor dynasty was born from the compromise of the two great houses of Lancaster and York. The Tudor Rose was born, and the Wars of the Roses ended.